The more leaders I speak with about this, the more leaders I discover did not feel they had the tools and strategies to effectively motivate themselves in their first leadership role. And anything they did learn came from their own experiences and thoughts. Every year, your business targets are rising, all leading to the big question: did we make more money than last year? I firmly believe that no one on this planet is motivated by money. The most sustainable motivation we have is intrinsic, but leaders all over the world have taken ownership of their team's motivation, and it's time to hand it back. This immediately starts to unburden you with the responsibility for everyone else's motivators. When businesses continue to increase targets and remove sustainable motivation from their priorities list, eventually, failure is inevitable. In 21st century working, sustainable motivation and the building of strong commitment is the only way business and leadership succeeds. Hey, welcome to the Leaders Podcast with me, Laura McDonald, the leadership coach and mentor. Come with me as I explore the elements of leadership that give leaders like you the power and confidence to make the impact you know you can. I'll be sharing my own experiences, top tips and insights, and talking to some very special guests to share their thoughts and leadership experiences on mindset, influence, change, and growth. So let's get right to it. In this modern world of work, there's a larger discussion now of people-centered leadership than ever before. But alongside that are burned-out leaders being asked to do more and more with less and less, struggling to keep themselves motivated, let alone their teams. Worse than that, the responsibility for motivating teams has been almost entirely shouldered by leaders, and when that goes on long enough, team members accept that, eventually expecting that the only way they could be truly motivated is if the leader is their most positive, empowering, inspirational self every day. More pressure leaders don't need, and more skills we don't need our people to lose. Because motivating ourselves is a skill, and when you enter leadership, it's more important than in any other job role you've ever held. There's a lot of tips out there about how to motivate our teams, but what if the tips we need are on how to motivate ourselves? Too many leaders still go into their first leadership role without the tools and strategies they need to lead effectively. According to research by Centre for Creative Leadership published in 2021, 40% of aspiring leaders feel they'll worry too much about leadership responsibilities. 37% feel leadership will bring a high degree of stress. And 35% feel they'll need to give up too much to take on a leadership role. To succeed, aspiring leaders need not just support, but the right support. And existing leaders need that support too. That includes the tools and strategies to motivate themselves, to make the impact they know they can make. The more leaders I speak with about this, the more leaders I discover did not feel they had the tools and strategies to effectively motivate themselves in their first leadership role, and anything they did learn came from their own experiences and thoughts rather than direct external support, taking far longer than it should have to get to the place where they felt they could confidently do this, by which time they had the pressure of motivating others on their shoulders, and that weight was starting to get heavy. What's fascinating to me is our own perception of motivating factors. I work with a lot of leadership groups from small to large, from single organisations to mixed companies and levels of leadership. The topic of motivation is a regular feature, and for the last 4 years, I've been keeping track of something. Of the 21 groups I've trained in the past 4 years where motivation is a direct topic of conversation, the first question I ask is, what are your own team members motivated by? And the very first answer that comes back in just under 91% of cases is money. In the remaining 9%, money was the second or third answer. The next question I ask is, what are you, the leaders, motivated by? And in 95% of cases, money doesn't even appear in the top 10. So there's a lot of assumption out there that our team's motivations are based on money, yet we rarely name it as one of our own drivers, and there is the ever-present danger that new and aspiring leaders will eventually succumb to this way of thinking, deepening the repetition of old beliefs into the next generation. This was further ingrained when the term quiet quitting came to life a few years ago. Well, let's get one thing straight. Nobody quit anything. They're still there, but their commitment to you is now obligatory, not emotional. The truth is, it's not really an assumption others are motivated by money. It's the escape route from learning about their true motivators. And the reason for that escape strategy vary, one of them being leaders are too exhausted from trying to learn how to motivate themselves and don't have anything left in the tank to find out what motivates others. They're on the treadmill already. I ask a single question of every guest on this podcast for the sole purpose of helping you serve others better by serving yourself. So this episode is for you to serve yourself by serving your motivation. Thinking back to my first episode on servant leadership and the many conversations we've had here since then, I am aware that there are probably many of you out there still thinking you need to focus on others before yourself, and that will be the reason you don't work on your own motivation. So there's the first barrier to overcome: mindset. When I ask leaders for the most important skills and behaviours in leadership, one of the top answers is always lead by example, and I couldn't agree more. Like it or not, your team will do what you do, not what you say, when it comes to their own behaviour. So the way you motivate yourself and showing that you do proactively motivate yourself will determine whether they do this themselves and how much effort they put into that. So even if you are the person who puts everyone before yourself, you can rest assured that doing this will serve your team. They need to see you serving yourself, and you are serving them by doing this. But more than that, you do need that self-service. More importantly, you deserve it. And these skills are not a nice to have, but a necessity for your own success and impact as a leader. Self-care is not selfish. It's necessary for your growth. I would never have put as much time and effort into listening to all my guests' ways of serving themselves if I did not know for a fact that self-care is essential. And I certainly wouldn't have spent the whole of my first episode of this podcast sharing all the lessons I learned through the hard journey of excluding myself for the sake of putting others first, if I'd not learned at the end of that difficult road that putting effort into me made me a better leader to others. Because as much as I do dedicate my professional life and a lot of my personal life to serving others, I want to feel at the end of it all that I was impactful. I did make a difference. I served people to the best of my ability. And I now know I would not feel any of that if I'd carried on ignoring myself. A lot of this mindset piece is driven by the messages we send ourselves. Some of that stems from our own company's vision, mission and values. When they're aligned with our own values and beliefs, the company seems to serve a clear purpose that we believe is good and will make a difference in the world. They're often some of the fundamental reasons we stay and try hard. But there are other messages we feed ourselves and each other in this environment. For example, that we're motivated by money. Every year, your business targets are rising, and at the end of that year will be a presentation declaring how many clients you've served, how many programs you've run, how many products you've solved, services you've provided, and so on, all leading to the big question: did we make more money than last year? If the answer is yes, we feel good for a minute and go straight back to it. If the answer is no, we go right back to the grind, trying to recoup whatever losses we had this year and make the extra profit targeted for next year. We tell ourselves we're driven by money. But as I've said before, I firmly believe that no one on this planet is motivated by money. Even those privileged few who enjoy the power, influence and status money gives them are not motivated by money. They're motivated by power, influence and status. And those at the other end who work day and night to earn the smallest amount are motivated by what that small amount gives them: security, food, warmth. When it comes to leadership, it's just as important to recognise these core motivations for doing what we do, and stepping into this role of responsibility for those around us needs that transparency with ourselves before we can offer it to others. We didn't step into leadership for no reason. Every leader I've ever met is motivated by the idea of making an impact, not more profit. The effective ones are the ones who say that out loud. My guest Rachel Morgan Trimmer said in her episode on neurodiversity inclusion a couple of weeks ago that willingness to make a change means you're already 90% of the way there. I'd agree that the same is true of changing yourself. If you're still, for whatever reason, sat there shrugging it off with a little awkward smile thinking, I know, but... then let me tell you this. No leadership journey is easy. Nothing worth doing in this life is easy. But there really is no reason to make this harder on yourself. The most sustainable motivation we have is intrinsic, but leaders all over the world have taken ownership of their team's motivation, and it's time to hand it back. What I mean is, instead of encouraging others to find out for themselves what motivates them in the job, in life, as a person, and understand all those things as leaders so we can help them to thrive, We pepper our teams with extrinsic motivators in the hope that it's enough to keep them at the standard expected. For instance, we have Employee of the Month, bonus and reward structures, praise, potential promotions, and so on. All the things we can determine may or may not happen for others. None of these things are bad, but alone they're not enough to sustainably motivate another person. And without the knowledge of their intrinsic motivators, our influence on them will only go so far. The same can be said of you. If your own leaders rely on extrinsic motivators to keep you engaged and have not yet supported you to gain the skills to explore your own intrinsic motivators, you will find there's a limit to how far you can support yourself before you've jumped on the treadmill, and there's a limit to how far and how fast your leaders will be able to convince you to run. Motivation and commitment are strongly linked, with motivation providing the initial spark, the electricity to get the engine of commitment started. If we ask people to get committed to something before they're motivated to do it, we risk burnout and possible resentment, as they're now committed to a goal out of obligation rather than will or desire. And it's all very well being motivated, but without the building of commitment, following through on any of your goals is a lot less likely. So I want to help you gain the skills you need to discover those intrinsic motivators for yourself. Let's start by exploring what intrinsic means in this context. It's the incentive of satisfaction, fulfillment, or enjoyment that drives you to do something. In other words, you're doing it because you want to, because it makes you feel good, because it's interesting, because you're emotionally connected to it in some way. So your task is to find those connections, that satisfaction, fulfillment, and enjoyment, and understand what it is in those moments that's driving you. Start with the most obvious things in your life, the activities in your job or your life that you love planning or being a part of that are the highlight of your week. What is it about them that lights you up? You might start with some of the key words I've given you, like fulfilling, enjoyable, etc., but go deeper. Try to discover what makes it fun, what makes it meaningful, what makes it the highlight of your week. Once you've got a list of reasons why, you can be safe in the knowledge that you're starting to understand your intrinsic motivators. Now we can deepen this further. You may have heard me say in a few episodes on here that I believe there are two important questions you can ask team members to establish what motivates them. Well, now I'm asking you to direct them to yourself. Here's the first one. Of all the things you could have done and all the companies you could have done it with, why this job with this company? What is keeping you connected to this role? Finding this out helps you understand your goals, deepen your connection to your role by understanding the purpose behind staying, and gives you key information you can use for future roles in this or any other company. But it's also important to remember that the answer to this will continue to develop over time. In the beginning, it might have just been that the role sounded interesting, you heard good things about the company, but over time that grows to more emotionally connected reasons. These are the ones more crucial to understand. So ask yourself that question every 6 months to a year and see if anything else has cropped up. Here's the second question. One you might need to ask yourself at more random points, but certainly more regularly than the first. What are you spending your money on right now? As I said earlier in this episode, I firmly believe that no one on this earth is motivated by money. They're motivated by what money gives them, and what you're currently spending your money on could give you vital clues to other intrinsic motivators. These may also change over time. For instance, when I was saving money for my wedding, that was a once-in-a-lifetime saving. So once that was done, it moved on to other things. But while it was there, one of the drivers behind it was being able to pay for this amazing day ourselves, so that all the choices were ours and we could have the wedding we wanted. I won't speak for my wife, but my biggest driver for this was autonomy. Saving money for my son now, for instance, is a longer-term action, much longer term. And the drivers behind that include things like making sure he has some security in his future, that when he needs things like a car, a house, or access to university, we can support him with those things. This provides me with a purpose, providing for my family, which builds a commitment to the activity of saving. When it comes to hobbies and so on in the past, the drivers have ranged from keeping fit to wanting to be better at a game I love, burning off the stress of the day, to just having something for me. That one's clearly important to me. So it could be a sense of mastery I'm trying to achieve, or retention of my autonomy, or it could be for a purpose like well-being and health. The range of drivers behind my past activities like rugby and football have usually been so collectively strong that it kept me going to them even when I felt like I wasn't doing well or didn't feel I had enough energy to go. In those moments, I never regretted my decision to go to training in the end, because once I'd been to training, I'd felt so much better, like I'd achieved something. So now you've answered those two questions, you're starting to get a clearer picture of the things that drive you to do something just because you want to. And you can start to use those motivators to help you make change, utilize your time and energy in a more productive way, and build your leadership up to its most effective and impactful in the way that feels aligned for you. These are important skills to have, so start with what I've outlined here, and it's okay if you initially find that deeper language difficult, it just takes some practice. If you need my support to find your intrinsic motivators and use them to make the impact you know you can, get in touch. Whether it's one-to-one support or to be part of a group, I've got you. Motivation is a regular part of my training programs and sessions, but as I said earlier, leaders very rarely mention money as a motivator for themselves. But it is a constant factor in the minds of leaders for their team members, which often leads to making decisions about what will motivate other people without consulting them. When you know what motivates you, how much easier does the process become? In terms of effort, you still have to put the work in and build and execute effective strategies towards your goals. But how much more comfortable does that process feel knowing what you know? You're much better equipped to make decisions on activities and actions knowing what will keep you on track and what won't. Do we all have to do things that aren't motivating sometimes? Absolutely. But when it's surrounded by paths and decisions that make us feel good, like we've achieved something at the end of the day, those mundane or unexciting activities are much more tolerable. We're better able to see the reasons why they're needed, and our commitment to our goals is retained. So how would it feel if most or all of the decisions around how to motivate you were made by someone else? Would your commitment be as high? Would you feel like you've achieved something at the end of the day? And if you did, would it feel like it was for you or for someone else? It's a great feeling when we feel like we've helped someone, especially our team. We can feel like we're really part of something purposeful. But without that understanding of our own motivators and the emotional commitment that we have to that purpose, that commitment has a risk of burning us out. Like I said, the leaders I've met over the years are motivated by making an impact, not more profit. So while business targets do need to be made, giving the leaders in your business the time and space to discover and then act on their own motivators is a must for long-term commitment to the business. Building your own skills in this area and then showcasing them to your team is the answer. It's leading by example. So start with you before you focus on anyone else. More to the point, spending time teaching your team these skills so they can use them on themselves provides valuable insight to you and allows you to do more coaching than decision-making when it comes to how they will be motivated and drive their own commitment. This immediately starts to unburden you with the responsibility for everyone else's motivators. Unless you are the top brass in your company, extrinsic motivators like bonuses and employee of the month schemes will not have been your decision. Will you still use them? Yes, but they won't be the primary go-to anymore. You'll still utilise promotions where appropriate, but these are few and far between, so it's best not to rely on them or the promise of them, as that will only go so far, and you can't guarantee anybody that they're going to get promoted on the day. Feedback is a tool you'll use continuously so that team members know exactly where they stand, what they need to start, stop and continue. But again, a lot of this will come from you, and when it's given is also decided by you. Most businesses are not set up to treat people like people, and all the strategies I've just mentioned for motivating others are very often interpreted as ways to get me to make more money for someone else. Some research indicates that 85% of companies focus on emphasizing profit over people in their annual reports. And when profit seems to be the only measure that matters, it's no wonder that so many employees are disconnected from their leaders and organizations. If they feel like making money is their only purpose, they're being used as a tool to do that, and they have no say in how they're motivated to get that done. The message is simply get it done. Commitment has next to no chance of developing at all. We don't want team members thinking they have no say. We want them empowered and involved. So teach them the skills you've learned in self-motivation. Instead of a motivational system set up to dictate with a demand for commitment and all the weight on your shoulders to keep that commitment going, you'll have a wealth of information coming straight from every team member and will support them to build their own strategy for achieving their goals and yours. And because you've learned to do this for yourself, you'll have the strategies, mindset, and clear goals in place to support them effectively, leading by example with the drive and commitment you've built to make it feel as purposeful for you as it does for them. I mentioned a few episodes ago the CEO of the Institute of Leadership said, "Leadership is what we share," and this is vital information to share. I had an idea earlier this year, and I'm sure that other people have thought about it too, but never really voiced it. I've started talking to leaders about the concept of freezing business targets for 2 or 3 years to allow leaders and their teams to find their motivations, areas of interest, and ideas for business impact rather than growth, so they can deepen their connection to the business mission, their roles, and each other. We're such a profit-driven world, and many businesses are still under the impression that the only purpose they really have is to make money. The pressure to let profit outrank any other purpose is further increased by investors, insisting that year on year they make more and more money, and the only way to do that is to keep increasing targets and put more people under pressure. One business I was previously associated with was bought by an investment firm while I was there, and the culture changed instantly. We went from caring about the quality of our services to signing as many people up as we could to get the initial payment, with no room for care as to whether the client wanted the service or would actually use it. It turned my purpose from people development into salesman, not what I signed up for, not what I wanted to do with my life, and not aligned with my morals. It felt really wrong signing people up to something they didn't want. I became committed out of a sense of obligation, not desire, and while I did still fight to do the quality of work I wanted to do, it was clear towards the end that only one thing was important now: profit. I refrained from putting my ideas forward to the higher decision makers and started to pull back on the targets I set with my managers, which made me feel demotivated and unengaged. Once again, the decisions on how I was motivated were reduced to the promises of promotions and bonus structures. If I'd stayed there, I dread to think how I'd be feeling now. Here's the business case for freezing targets. It costs on average £30,000 to recruit and train a new member of staff. If just one new hire could be prevented a year, that's £30,000 you've just saved your business. And if you and your team are building those motivations, finding those areas of interest, generating and executing ideas for business impact, don't you think organic growth will come? As human beings, we need the time to process what's happening around us, to explore ourselves and develop so we can be intentional with our roles, our kids, our friends, our partners, be present and engaged, and feel like all those years of work were actually worth it when we finally sit down. When businesses continue to increase targets and remove sustainable motivation from their priorities lists, eventually, failure is inevitable. Dwight D. Eisenhower described leadership as the art of getting someone to do something you want done because they want to do it. This leads me to a crucial point about motivating yourself, making the time to do it. Linking back to the mindset I spoke about in the beginning, the first person who needs to know this is important for you is you. So if you are the leader that shrugs it off and says, "I know, but," don't be surprised if your motivation and your commitment don't stick around. And certainly don't be surprised when your teams fails too. Making that change in yourself is not as big as it might seem. If you spent 5 minutes at the beginning of every day writing down one experience where you felt motivated and what about it made you feel that way, how much self-knowledge would you gather in a week or a month? Think about what you could do with all that. If after the first week and using what you know now, you spent 2 minutes at the end of every day writing down one thing you're going to do tomorrow that will motivate you and build your commitment towards your goals, how empowering would that feel? And how much more likely do you think you would be in succeeding? Your team will only do it if you lead by example consistently. And when passing these skills on to your team, ensure that conversation remains a firm two-way street and support them in making that time to use those skills. If your team members are overloaded with work, they won't have the time to motivate themselves, and you'll be recruiting again very, very soon. I've told you one firm belief of mine today, but here's something I outright know. In 21st century working, sustainable motivation and the building of strong commitment is the only way business and leadership succeeds. That starts with you knowing how to motivate yourself. We can no longer ignore the human side of business. We can no longer ignore our own and others' needs for a purposeful life, or the desire to be good at things, or to make our own choices. People don't buy products or services anymore, they buy people. And when those people are unmotivated and uncommitted, it shows. It's time to hand the responsibility of motivation back to every person in your team and take it back for yourself. Lead by example. Go first. Others will follow. Until next time, everyone.